Not long ago, the survival of bald eagles was in question. But through the work of dedicated conservationists and changing values in our societies, these birds have the opportunity to thrive once again. Although bald eagles continue to face many hurdles imposed by people, and they remain rare in certain areas of North America, the recovery of this species is a true success story. I'm excited to talk with one of the leaders in bald eagle conservation right now. So, to discuss eagles, particularly their ecology and the restoration of those birds in the Channel Islands region off the coast of Southern California, I'm joined by Dr. Peter Sharpe, a research ecologist with the Institute for Wildlife Studies. And that's a nonprofit that gathers information to maintain biodiversity and enhance our understanding of the animals that we share the world with. Dr. Sharpe has decades of experience working to restore bald eagles on the Channel Islands. And Peter, thanks so much for being here with me today.
It's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks.
And if you have questions for Dr. Sharpe about bald eagles, he's a great person to ask. So drop those in the comments, and we'll try to get to a few of those either during the broadcast or after I get through my set of questions for him towards the end of the chat. And Peter, like I mentioned in the introduction, one part of the story I think of bald eagles, especially over the last 150 years or so, is part of that story is loss and human persecution and habitat loss. I mean, they certainly played a large role in the decline of bald eagles across the United States in the 20th century. But pesticide manufacturing, its use and its disposal almost delivered the final blow to these birds. I mean, that eventually led to the local extinction of eagles on the Channel Islands in the 1960s. In particular, DDT contamination is especially harmful to eagles and other large birds. So how does DDT affect eagles, and how persistent is that chemical in the environment?
The DDT itself is not persistent, but it breaks down into different molecules. DDE is one of the main things it breaks down to, and that is persistent in the environment. It's been outlawed for 50 years since 1972, and it's still found throughout the Southern California bight, from Point Conception down to Mexico. And that's from a large-scale manufacturing and dumping that took place from 1947 through the early 70s. So what DDE does to a bird is it impacts how the females lay the eggshell down onto the egg. It can be thinner, it can have larger pores, which causes them to dehydrate pretty quickly, and that's when they tend to break in the nest. They just sort of dry out and then get crushed by the adults.
And bald eagles largely, disappeared from the Channel Islands due to a variety of factors, especially DDT and DDE contamination. And as part of the effort to restore an eagle population on the Channel Islands, thankfully, the rest of the habitat was intact. They had space to nest. They had ample food sources in that region. So eagles were transplanted from mainland North America and first released on Catalina Island in the 1980s, as well as Santa Cruz Island in the early 2000s. How readily did those birds adjust to their new homes?
The whole idea behind releasing the birds through the hacking process, which is where we put them into a large cage up on stilts so that they're safe from the foxes and pigs and everything that were on the island. So the process is where they learn to fly, is where they essentially see as home. So once they're released onto the island, many stuck around on the islands because there were plenty to scavenge upon. Others would leave the island, spend several years flying up and down the west coast. We get birds up into central British Columbia at times. But once they reach the breeding age, around 4 to 5 years old, many of those would come back to the islands and establish territories. So as far as we know, all the birds that are breeding on the Channel Islands are ones that we released or descendants of ones that we released.
And that's kind of amazing that they will disperse and maybe settle down in a new area, or settle down, come back to the Channel Islands and settle down and make a living there. What does that say really about the ability of eagles to adapt to new habitats, places that maybe they haven't had much experience with before?
Right. Well, I think, every species has some bit of dispersal, away from their natal areas. That's how you get an expansion of a population. The bald eagles are very tolerant at times. A lot of the nests are, on the mainland, are in people's backyards. On Catalina Island, we've had them nesting right over the main road system outside of town. So they can be adaptable. It's, during the breeding season, they don't like people to be too near the nest tree or above them. If you're below them, they seem to be much more tolerant.
And as you mentioned before, DDT contamination and then its derivatives, DDE, that resulted in thinned eggshells and broken eggs at many nests. And some of the birds that were released as part of that hacking program had difficulty keeping their eggs through the incubation period. The shells were just too thin to withstand normal incubation. So what steps were necessary to give those birds a fighting chance at reproductive success?
We had our first known breeding in 1987 and 88 on Catalina. We were able to collect some of those eggs and eggshells for contaminants analysis, and they were just loaded with DDE. So following starting in 89, we began removing all of the eggs from the nests and replacing them with fake eggs, which the adults would continue to incubate. And then we would attempt to hatch the eggs either at the Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group through 91 or at the San Francisco Zoo through 2004. And then any chicks that they produced that hatched, which were very few, unfortunately, or that were hatched by captive birds at the San Francisco Zoo, would then be fostered back into the nests. And we did that through 2008 was the last year that we actually took any of the eggs. So it was a long process, considering, DDT was banned in 72.
Absolutely. And that wasn't the only challenge that bald eagles faced on the Channel Islands. As settlers arrived in that area, they altered the landscape, and the landscape actually became more hospitable to golden eagles, from what I've read. Golden eagles found a new prey base in the form of introduced pigs, mule deer fawns as well that were introduced to the island. And the golden eagles also learned to prey on island foxes, which is a species of fox that lives only on the Channel Islands. So as a partial competitor for bald eagles, how did the presence of golden eagles complicate restoration efforts?
The golden eagles occurred only up on the northern Channel Islands. Fortunately, we've not had them on Catalina Island. There was some competition between one particular golden eagle and one pair of bald eagles at the Fraser Point nest. It disrupted breeding for a couple of years until the Fraser Point birds moved to a different location. They're not generally direct competitors because the bald eagles are more marine oriented in their food resources, so fish, gulls, cormorants, whereas, as you mentioned, the golden eagles like mammals, so the island fox, deer and deer carcasses, pigs and pig carcasses. One of the biggest issues on Santa Cruz Island was the pig population, because they produce a lot of piglets, and piglets are the perfect food source for the golden eagles. So I think that's largely what kept the eagles up on the northern islands. We were able to eventually trap and remove all the golden eagles except for this one, apparently, and move them to Northern California. So we were able to simultaneously restore the bald eagles to the islands and remove the golden eagles, remove the pigs, and eventually removed the deer and elk. So sort of got rid of the main food sources that would keep attracting the golden eagles back to the islands.
And I'm here with Dr. Peter Sharpe from the Institute for Wildlife Studies, and we're discussing bald eagle restoration and conservation in California's Channel Islands region. And Peter, you make regular trips to the Channel Islands to monitor and study eagles, young eagles. You go out there, you band them just before they leave the nest permanently, and some get wing tags. And we're often asked about the wing tags since they are so conspicuous. Can you tell us a little bit about that tagging process? Specifically, I'm wondering, how do you attach the tags? Do they impair the bird's movements at all? And what purpose do the tags serve?
Well, the purpose of the tags was to be able to identify them, especially during the initial restoration efforts. This allowed us and other people to identify the birds from a distance. So I can read one of those tags from 3/4 of a mile away through a spotting scope. So it just allowed us to get better information on the survival and movements of these birds. I've got a database of sightings of these birds, Alberta, Canada, British Columbia, Montana, just all over the place. So we have a good idea of where they've been moving to. Now, the tag itself is made of a very lightweight, sturdy material. Because they're put on so early, the birds learn to fly with them. They treat them like a feather. And what they do, the tag is folded over the leading edge of the wing. And then there's a round, it's a pig ear tag that is punctured through the patagium, which is a very, very thin piece of skin. No real nerves or blood vessels. So that just holds it on the top and bottom of the wing.
And they're great to help me when I'm watching the eagle cams that we have on the Channel Islands, because individual eagles, they can be, differentiated if you look really closely at some of the details. But even through a webcam, sometimes for me, it's difficult to tell like the males and the females apart, which one's the mom, which one's the dad. And we've seen a bit of turnover on some of our eagle nests over the last few years on the Channel Islands, specifically at the West End nest on Catalina Island. And that's an island that's basically due south of Los Angeles and Long Beach. The resident male and female there experienced fairly good nesting success between, according to my notes, 2016 and 2019. And the resident female from those years, who's nicknamed Thunder, her number is K91. She remains on the nest this year, but her original partner, who was nicknamed Superman, he disappeared for unknown reasons. So K91 began nesting with a new male, A61, in 2020, and they've not yet fledged any chicks. This pair is currently caring for 3 young chicks, so things look promising for them at the moment. But the pair's limited success thus far has me wondering, and here's my question for you, what about mate turnover and parental experience? How does that influence the nesting success of bald eagles?
Oftentimes, the first year or two after there's a turnover, there will be limited success, especially if it's a young bird. So A61 is a first-time breeder. When they first attempted in 2020, he didn't really know what the purpose of incubation was. So he left the nest and ravens got the eggs. Same thing happened last year, but this time in 2021, I put equal blame on the Thunder, because bald eagles often do a nest switch. They see their mate coming towards the nest, they get up and leave, and the mate's supposed to come in and take over the incubation. This time, she was coming towards the nest. He got up, took off, and then she just kept flying past the nest, and they both went their separate ways. And ravens, unfortunately, came in and got the eggs again. One of the benefits of our project with having all or most of the eagles banded is that we do get good information on the turnovers. So we usually always know when there's a mate turnover, and know who that bird is, where it came from. So there's a lot more turnover than people think. Many of the nests with unbanded birds, if there's a turnover to another adult, you often wouldn't even know that there had been a switch.
So I guess it seems like communication issues between partners is just not a thing between humans. It may even break up some divorce. You know, those happen in the animal world as well. Does
Exactly.
that seem accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And you know, over the last 20 years, there's been some pretty good success for for bald eagle recovery and reproduction on the Channel Islands. You mentioned a little bit ago about where the birds might go after they fledge from the nest, for instance. Can you talk a little bit more specifically about that? Um, when young eagles fledge from the nest, where are they going? Or they're exploring sort of like the local area, but you said there's also some birds that fly to some far-flung locations.
Right. Immediately after fledging, they usually stick around within their parents' territory for about a month. After that, they'll start exploring the island that they're on, um, often going to like the furthest north spot. So on Catalina Island, we get a lot of birds that show up right around where that west end nest is, following fledging. And then now most of the birds leave the island and go to the mainland. We had GPS transmitters on them for years, so we were able to get very good information on their movements. Um, we've had birds go up to like Washington State and back 4 separate trips, one each year, and then finally settle down on the islands. Um, they usually settle down within about 200 miles of where they learn to fly to breed. So we do have breeding birds that were from the Channel Islands, from San Diego area all the way up to central California. We've had records of birds breeding. Um, so our project didn't just restore the birds to the islands, it also helped restore the Southern California and Central California population.
Oh, that's kind of a fascinating thing to consider as well. That the Channel Islands might be like a source of dispersal into other areas of California, so they're just
Right.
kind of not sticking around there. So yeah, really really cool to know. And I have a few more questions for Peter here. I know we have a lot of questions in our queue from the audience. We'll try to get to those in just a few minutes. So thanks everyone who submitted questions. And if you do have questions for him about bald eagles, drop those in the chat right now. And I'll try to get to a few of those here coming up pretty shortly, though. Peter, the conservation story of bald eagles isn't over. You know, it still takes a lot of work to ensure that the populations remain healthy. It takes a lot of work to study the animals and get to know more about their life history and their ecology. And one of the things that has been documented recently, unfortunately, is that eggs continue to break in eagle nests on the islands. And can you say and talk a little bit more about whether that's the result of persistent, DDT and its metabolite DDE contamination, and if so, how long might it be before bald eagles are no longer impacted by that chemical in this area?
Unfortunately, since we no longer collect the eggs for incubation, we can't get information on the contaminant levels in them because only the eggs that failed to hatch were being analyzed for that. I don't think there's a huge impact of the DDE right now. We do have certain nests where the eggs break. The Two Harbors nest almost always breaks one of their 2 eggs for some reason. Sauces breaks a lot of eggs, and I don't think that is related to the DDE because the pairs just north and just south of them do fine. So we really can't, without collecting the eggs, get good information on the DDE levels. We have analyzed peregrine falcon eggs in the last 5 to 10 years, and those do have DDE in them still. So if they're picking it up, then it's pretty sure that the bald eagles are picking up the DDE still. But the fact that most of the pairs are able to hatch at least one chick per season, um, it's a pretty good indication that the DDE is not um, as bad of a problem as it used to be. We used to not get any eggs hatching if they were left in the nest.
And do you think there's any, or there's additional habitat for more eagle nests on the Channel Islands? They're territorial birds, so they'll defend a nesting territory. But what about more space for some of these juveniles that might be coming back and looking to establish, a nesting territory?
Right. They once nested on all 8 of the islands. We currently only have them on 5 of the islands. Um, so there is more space out there. It's not the highest quality space on some of the islands. We A lot of the islands don't have much in the way of trees anymore, if they ever did, really. But we do get a lot of, sort of the ground nesting type. The West End is just on a rock pinnacle. Two Harbors is just on a rock ledge. So they do find places to breed, no matter where they are on the islands. So I think we could easily add in another 6 to 10 pairs of eagles on the islands.
Well, that'll be again fascinating to see in the future if we do have more nesting pairs out there. And this is a question that I think is important because birds throughout the world, many of their populations are declining. Bald eagle numbers have risen over the last several decades, thankfully. But how can people help bald eagles in the coastal California region and elsewhere in North America?
Give them some space. When they're breeding, give them some space. If you scare them off the nest at the wrong time of the breeding season, they can either abandon eggs, or like we see with the ravens, predators can come in and get the eggs. They can get the younger chicks. Usually once the chicks are 2 to 3 weeks old, there's not a lot of potential predators for them. Second, the biggest issue with bald eagles right now seems to be lead poisoning. So if your state still allows hunting with lead, try to push for non-lead alternatives. They're primarily scavengers when that's available. So, shooting a deer and either leaving a gut pile with lead fragments in it, or, not finding the carcass and just having the birds scavenge on it. It impacts the bald eagles, golden eagles, a variety of different birds.
Yeah, that's a great point. So yeah, if you're a hunter too, make sure that you consider using non-lead ammunition. That helps all sorts of wildlife, including the bald eagles that we love to watch and enjoy watching. One final question for me specifically before we do get to those audience questions. Haven't forgot about those yet. But Peter, what do you enjoy most about your work with eagles?
I think it's getting to places on these islands that not too many other people get to go. Sitting along the coastline on a remote part of one of these islands, watching the birds, watching the blue whales and the humpbacks and the gray whales swim by. You just get to see a lot of interesting things when you take the time just to sit quietly out there and look around.
Yeah, I'm a bit envious of you having that experience. I've been to the Channel Islands. I haven't spent a whole lot of time there. I'd love to spend more time, but yeah, to get out there to some of those more remote locations and just sit and watch the world sort of turn around you, I think that would be quite an incredible experience. And thanks to everybody who's submitted questions for Peter Sharpe, who is here to talk about bald eagles, specifically bald eagles on the Channel Islands. And we have a lot of questions from you. I'm going to try to get to a few of those before we conclude the chat here. And let's see here. Peter, one of the first questions that came up actually was a little bit about you. Maybe it's just a follow-up question from my last one. Somebody was wondering why eagles? Why did you get into birds?
Well, I just sort of fell into birds. I'm actually sort of more interested in mammals. I did my
Okay.
PhD work with ground squirrels. I really like predatory animals, so I guess that's one way that the eagles fell into it. This was actually just a 9-month position with possibility of extension back in '97 when I got the job. So it just fell in love with the islands, fell in love with being able to do work where you can actually see the results of it in real time. When I started, I think we had 3 pairs of bald eagles, all on Catalina Island. And now I think we're up into the probably 23, 24 pairs this year, scattered across 5 different islands. So, my time here has been very rewarding doing this kind of work.
Absolutely. And with the cameras that we have on explore.org, we get to see some really intimate moments with a lot of the different birds and a lot of different nests. And we get to see, some of the difficulties and challenges that the bald eagles face. And the first question that was actually submitted from our audience, probably 10, 15 minutes ago, was a little bit about the dynamics that happens at nests. Sometimes we see eagles be able to raise all of the chicks that hatch out of the eggs. Sometimes they're not unable to do so. And somebody was wondering, do bald eagles raise, their third babies, or do only 2 of the 3 eggs, or will they do that only with 2 of the 3 eggs when they lay 3 eggs? As far as I understand it, they're trying to raise all of the chicks that end up hatching. But please correct me if I'm wrong. What are they aiming for? I know some birds lay more eggs, for instance, than they may end up being able to feasibly raise to fledging.
Right. It's all about maximizing your productivity, how many offspring you get out into the world. They don't have control over how many eggs they lay. So if they have 3 eggs and 3 chicks hatch, they're going to take care of them all. But you get that sibling rivalry and get a pecking order. So, we see the chicks bonking each other. They're usually not this polite as the video is showing. So you tend to get one of the chicks is the dominant chick. So it gets fed first. If there's enough food, the second and the third chick will get fed. Usually the smallest chick does find ways to sneak about and get food. So they do get creative, but the adults are feeding who's trying to get food. So, they're not equally one for you, one for you, one for you. It's, your mouth is up there, you get fed, you go to sleep, the second one gets some more, you go to sleep, the third one gets some more. So as long as there's enough food, all 3 should do just fine.
And we talked about wing tags earlier. You did mention something about GPS tracking, though. So somebody was wondering about that. Does IWS still actively track any of the Channel Islands eagles via GPS?
No, we stopped putting those on. I can't remember, maybe 2017, a little bit before. Those things cost about $4,000 a piece and $1,000 a year each for the data. It's a backpack transmitter, so it takes more time for us to be at the nests. You also have to wait till they're 8 weeks old so that they're full grown. They're not going to get much more growth, so that the straps don't get tight on the bird. When we started doing peregrine falcon work as well and banding those, sort of moved the eagle banding up a couple of weeks so that we would have time to get to the peregrines as well. So we do not do the GPS tracking anymore. I think we got the information we needed from that just to see where they're going during the fall and winter.
We also talked a little bit about sort of like the dynamics between uh, adult pairs in the nest and how maybe they split up after a period of time. Somebody was wondering about bald eagles and whether or not they mate for life. So can you talk just a little bit more about maybe how pair bonds form and how long they might last?
I always say bald eagles mate for life like humans do. So sometimes you'll get a divorce, especially if they're unsuccessful for a couple seasons. They will break up and uh, go find other mates. Um, Sometimes one gets driven away, either alive or unfortunately killed. We usually don't find the ones that die. It's just hard to find an eagle out in the middle of 100 square mile island, or they often end up in the water. So, like the sauce's nest, one of the females there was driven away, and then she's been nesting successfully at the baby's harbor nest for years now. Um, and like I mentioned, there's quite a bit of turnover just that we would never even know about if the birds weren't tagged or banded. So, sort of one of the papers I want to write is the rates of turnover. Um, then you get other pairs that are pretty much together until one of them dies. The West End pair, that nest has been going since 1991. We had a trio there nesting into the mid early 2000s. We've got the two arbors pair that have been breeding together since I think 2004 now. So you do get these long-term pairs, but you also do get a bit more turnover than I think people really know about.
The next question that we have here is actually kind of maybe a fun one to talk about, and it's one of the reasons why I am annoying to watch movies with, because I notice stuff like this. Somebody was wondering, is it true that most bald eagle sounds in movies come from the red-tailed hawk? I have certainly noticed that people who make TV and movies, they don't use accurate bird calls in their movies, and it bugs the crap out of me. I don't know if that's the same way with you, but that often happens with bald eagles. You see a bald eagle, but they don't use bald eagle noises. Have you noticed something similar?
Yes, the bald eagles don't make a very terrifying sound, so they tend to use red-tailed hawks for any big bird that's flying around, soaring overhead. The one that gets me is like having a common loon in the South American jungle or something. But yeah, I do say that bird's not found there, but they just have a general sound file that they they use for the background.
Right. I remember, and just general too. Like if you watch television shows, they'll say this show takes place in some other part of North America, but when they go outside, it's like clearly Orange County, California, or something like that.
Right.
So take a closer look. You'll notice that stuff all the time. Uh, the eagles, they end up feeding on a lot of different things. They will hunt, they'll scavenge readily, and they'll eat almost any type of sort of animal that they can get their talons on. So somebody was wondering about the Sauce's eagles. They noticed that the Sauce's eagles often feed their young on seal placenta. Do other island eagles do this?
We have not seen the placenta deliveries to to any of the other nests. Don't really know where it's coming from. The closest beaches, at least the sandy ones, don't have seals as far as I know. So I'm sort of wondering if this is actually picked out of the water. It could be floating over from Santa Rosa Island, getting washed off the beaches over there. I mean, there could be some harbor seals breeding in beaches that we don't get to see very often, but nobody else seems to bring those to the nest. It's pretty gross. I thought it was a balloon the first time I saw it.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to see how other animals, relish foods that would for a human like a carrion or something like that, a dead animal carcass would really gross us out or just make us sick. But how they're just adapted to tolerate
Hmm.
those different types of food sources. We also talked, of course, about banding and wing tags on the eagles. Somebody was wondering about the IWS tags and those bands. So so you have wing tags, you have leg bands on the eagles. How do you identify the birds that you have banded from other eagles in California? Are you using like a certain system, for instance, on those bands?
We Yeah, the bird banding lab has allowed us to use the orange band. So, all the birds get that silver federal band. Um, we didn't get permits to put those orange bands on the Northern Channel Islands birds until, uh, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, 5 or 10 years. So they were only getting the federal band. There aren't a lot of people banding eagles in California. I know Pete Bloom does some in Southern California, and he uses, I think, purple or blue bands. So, we can often tell apart birds that we've banded versus other birds that have been banded in Southern California. But, um, most of the eagles in California do not get banded. So there's just a lot of unknowns flying around out there.
And of course, we get to enjoy watching the chicks hatch and grow and hopefully fledge from the nest. Not all of them make it, however, and there's a couple of related questions in our queue here. This one is about the percentage of eaglets that make it to adulthood, and somebody was asked earlier that they read somewhere that something like 70 to 80% of bald eagles die in the first 5 years of their life. So people are kind of wondering about survival rates of bald eagles from the time that they end up fledging to adulthood. What do you know about that?
I can only speak the California Island eagles, and I think it's about 75% or more survival to adulthood for our birds. And I don't know if that's because the first couple months they're in a pretty safe place. We don't have a lot of power lines or high speed automobiles that can you know electrocute or hit the birds. Um, our biggest issue in the past has actually been drowning. So trying to fly from the islands to the mainland and just not making it. But haven't really had that issue in the last 5 years or so. That I don't think we've had any records of a washed up eagle on a mainland beach. Um, we did have the Fraser Point adult male end up dead in the water last summer, and there's just no way to say why that happened. A peregrine falcon could have hit him in the head and knocked him into the water. Uh, could have been mobbed by gulls. It's just impossible to say. But we do have a very high survival rate to adulthood of the birds that we've released.
And that's great to hear, considering how difficult it can be for juvenile animals to make their way in the world without the help of their parents. And one more question for you, Peter. Somebody was wondering, is there any idea why there's very, very little bonking occurring on the west end nest? The chicks there so far seem to be pretty polite towards one another. I don't know if that'll change as they mature and grow, but that's what we've been seeing so far.
Right. I don't know. I think it's because there has been pretty good food, especially during the first week. I think there were a lot of fishing boats out there because they were bringing in a lot of rockfish, which would not be available to the eagles if they were fishing on their own. Uh, the eagles tend to get fish that are within probably the top 6 to 8 inches of the water column. So the rockfish are bottom fish and would not be available. So I think partially it's a lot of food, so there's nobody's really hungry a lot of the time, and perhaps they learned quickly the pecking order and doesn't have to be beaten into you every feeding time.
Well, that's a nest that I'm going to continue to watch over the next couple of months as those eaglets mature and hopefully leave the nest as healthy juvenile birds. And it's been great to speak with you today, Peter. I learned a lot about bald eagles, and the story of the eagle really is a story of loss and redemption. Their decline to near extinction, as well as their ongoing recovery, reflects how society values wild animals and the efforts we put forward, or we put towards saving species. And I hope that eagles serve as an example for other animals and how we can protect them if we put the energy and the time and the effort into it. So I look forward to the eagles continued recovery throughout North America. And Peter, I'd like to thank you for your time in answering everyone's questions today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
And my guest today was Dr. Peter Sharpe, a research ecologist with the Institute for Wildlife Studies. If you want to learn more about his work and the Institute for Wildlife Studies, please visit their website at iws.org. A lot of the work that they do happens to be on islands that are managed by the National Park Service, the Channel Islands National Park. So if you want to learn more about that place, an amazing landscape, go to nps.gov/CHIS. And if you want to watch any of the eagle cams on explore.org, go to explore.org right now. Go to explore.org/eagles. And my name is Mike Fitz with explore.org. Thanks for joining me today. And as we like to say here, make sure that you never stop learning.